Howdy folks, welcome back. This is going to be video number 2 in this Valkyrie project. In this video my objective is we're going to yank the carbs out, we're going to tear them down, put them back together, get them on the bike. But I'm going to do it in an abbreviated format because if I did it step by step it would be a 3-hour video. But I already have a video on my channel about doing Val Carbs. So I'm just going to kind of give you the highlights as far as tearing it down, they're taking them off the bike that is, and then taking the carbs to bits basically and putting them back together. Give you some tips and hints mainly because it can be somewhat intimidating until you do it a couple times or at least once. So yeah, that's what we're going to do in this video, so let's go ahead and get right to it. Okay, anytime you do one of these things, I highly recommend you look at the service manual, which is up on the screen over there. I've already reviewed it. I kind of remembered how to do it, but I just wanted to verify. And a lot of the stuff that we need to remove normally is gone anyway, like the radiator covers and things like that. So that would be the steps you have to take, is just follow the service manual, which I'm not going to get into in great detail. You can do your own reading on your own, as far as research goes. So what we're going to do in this point is, since this thing is partially torn down anyway, I'm going to take the air box completely out. I'm going to do all this stuff off camera. I'm sorry I can't do it on camera. These upper engine mount brackets need to be moved. These are loose anyway on this side. And you're supposed to take them both out according to the service manual, get them out of your way. And then you loosen all the band clamps and take the cables off and out they come. So we don't have all the pair valve stuff in there that you normally have to disconnect and get out of the way, so that kind of speeds things up a little bit. And I'm not, I should have mentioned this in the other video, I'm not saying that you should do this. Technically it's illegal, so don't, but basically if you don't have that crap in place, like for example you took it off or somebody did or whatever, it's a hell of a lot easier to get the carbs out. So that's just my point here. I'm not saying go ahead and do that. Don't let it intimidate you, because you need to break it down into steps. When you break it down into smaller pieces, it's much easier to deal with. So again, this would be one of the pieces, is removing the carbs from the bike. So one reason why I mention that is you want to kind of pre-plan what you need to do regarding any other repairs or corrections that need to be made while the carbs are off. And in one of these cases would be these drain hoses I was talking about in the last video. So while the carbs are out of the way, we're going to rerun all those and have them ready to go to the bottom of the carbs. Just want to mention that. So if you needed to order hose for it, which I've already done and I have it in stock, do it before you have too much time pass, all right? Because then you're going to be stuck going, well, I need to put the carb back in and I can't get these hoses. So just kind of pre-plan as far as that goes. Hey, where'd my carbs go? There they are. All right, so a couple quick points on this. First of all, I blew the whole area off before I started anything. Make sure there's no dirt around these manifolds. You can see the yellow caps in place. I'll go over those here in a second. And the next step, of course, after you get everything out of the way, service manual says to loosen the band clamps. These are the band clamps on the carb holders, the rubber carb holders, which I'm going to replace. These are super stiff. I'd be a fool not to. I'd be a fool not to. On the bottom side of these manifolds rather, is where the O-ring goes, so we have new O-rings for that. We're going to replace those. You absolutely need to do that. It's pretty critical. My point here being is, once I loosen these, I have it all blown off. Once I remove the bolts from the manifolds, I lift these up and I stick these yellow caps in that comes in the kit from Red Eye Technical. This blocks off the holes here to prevent any schmoo or any crap from, junk, anything from going down inside there, which would be a bad thing. So I got them on both sides. Once these are in place, I can comfortably move these things around and be pretty confident that's going to fall inside the intakes. And then you just kind of wrestle these guys off and then take the carbs out. Yeah, so that's it. So what we're going to do now is set up to get these torn down, and we'll go over that in different ways as far as highlighting some points.
I somehow lost the audio in this clip, but all I'm talking about here is how organization is very important when you're doing these complicated carbs. Have an adequate workspace set up and have your bins set up where you can put components from all the carbs into individual bins. In this case, I'm going to disassemble the carb on the table and then turn around and do the actual individual carb work on Dad's old bench. What I am also talking about is taking a bunch of photos of everything before you start disassembly, so you have some reference, make some notes on a piece of paper, do anything you need to be a job aid for keeping track of where things go.
Right now I'm working on disassembling things off the carbs so I can split them. Anything that connects the two together, for example, this rear enricher cable. I'm going to work on this linkage right now. What this linkage does, obviously, if you haven't already figured that out, is it connects the two racks as far as the throttle goes. Now, the reason why I'm firing the camera up right now is I just want to point out that there's these little tiny, what do you call them, cotter pins, welcome back cotter pins. And you take these out and there's a certain order in which the there's like I want to call them like nylon washers and spacer, and there's also little bearings that go in here, and the kit comes with those. When I go to change these bearings out in this thing, I'll show you. It's actually kind of fiddly, but it's pretty easy. There's an actual little bearing, you know, like a ball, I don't know, needle bearing or something in there. And the main point here is do not bend this linkage at all. You know, don't grab it from here and pick the thing up or anything else when you're trying to get it off. You got to keep this straight, because if it isn't, then you have a problem with the two banks being out of sync as far as when the throttle operates. Now you might say, well, we can correct that with the synchronizer, but it's not necessarily the case, because if it's bent, it may flex. You know, in other words, it may not stay bent. And then you all of a sudden have a variable in regards to your throttle activation between one side and the other. So you definitely want to keep this, you know, straight as possible. You don't want it bent so it'll flex and then resume its bent position while the bike is under operation, because you never get these things dialed in right. It won't run right. That here's your slow screws. They're the D-shaped screws. So we're going to have to take them out with a special tool. If you don't have that special tool, one comes in the kit. Use one of your bins for common parts for both carbs or assembly parts, you know, carb assembly parts, and then save the other 6 bins for the individual carb parts. All right, so let's get to it, and we'll come back when I got something else interesting to tell you. Okay, I am pulling the carbs off of this rack now. I want to bring up a couple points, and if you buy the Red Eye kit, he has the instructions are very detailed in this area. You take these long studs out. You said stud. And sometimes they're frozen, so just tappy tap tap, use a little bit of penetrating oil, what have you. The main problem with these is there are dowel pins that lock the carb bodies together. Not on the front here because there's nothing out here, but on the back there's 2, and then there'll be ones in between each set up until this front bracket, which is actually between 1 and 2. And then you have, again, these dowel pins that are steel, and through galvanic corrosion they can be real stuck. Now this is my, like, I don't know, 3rd set, 4th set, whatever, of GL 1500 carbs that I've actually taken down to bits, and I have never had to really fight with these. But if you buy the Red Eye kit, he's got a tool that you can, when you flip, you have to flip these over to use it, I'm pretty sure, that gives you a safe spot that fills up an area, if you will. This is the tool here. It fills up an area between 2 carb where you can safely pry. I just wanted to also point out that there are springs between each carb, and there's also springs on the synchronizer adjusters, little tiny springs. Okay, those little tiny springs look like this, and be prepared for them to fly everywhere. You can't really get at all of them to pry them out, you know, ahead of time very easily. I mean, you can, but it's a pain in the ass. When you go to put these back together, it's even more of a pain in the ass because you do have to put them in afterwards. That's why you definitely have to sink these. You got to back the sink screws off to get some clearance in there. But my point here is you got to make sure you make a mental note where these springs are, and make sure that you collect them once you split the rack. Like when you start taking one set of carbs, one carb off of one side or one carb off the other, catch those springs, put them in your bin. He does give you extra springs in the kit for the synchronizers, because, you know, it's like a Jesus pin. You know, the thing goes bing across the shop and you go, Jesus. Well, they're like Jesus springs, same deal. And then you'll be able to replace them if necessary. I don't believe he's got any of those ones that go in between the 2 carbs. You can see it right there. Okay, that kind of keeps up the slack between the throttle shafts. I'll put you in the stand. We'll take a carb off here and show you what I mean. We're going to go ahead and pull number 2. You can tell it's number 2 because of the way it is, and there is a spring between it, and I don't have to wrestle with this one at all. we're going to start pulling this. These are the fuel teaser over there down below. These are the what do you call it? The fuel joints and the air joint, or not vacuum, but the air vent joint. And it just comes off like that. And we're going to grab that spring. Whoops. Right here. And here's the other spring that's between the adjuster down here for the synchronizer. Now you can really get at that and just take it off and put it in. All right, so you just have to be careful of that. Now again, if these things are frozen there, it's because of these steel pins. And luckily, look at these. I mean, they look damn pristine. So I'm kind of happy with that. I have, like I said, on all the ones I've done, you know, I'm not an expert at it, but the ones I have done, I have not had to wrestle with them all that much. Now I have these temporarily marked on the bottom and the top with marker. You can wipe it off with brake clean when you're done. And we'll set these aside and then reorganize and then turn around to the bench. That's where what I'll be doing is turning around to the bench and going through these one at a time in numerical sequence, 1 to 6. I don't skip around or stick by banks. I go 1 to 6 and then I keep organized that way.
Lost another audio clip here. I'm sorry. I apologize. What I'm saying here is I'm choosing, in this case, because I have a kit on hand instead of waiting on parts, I'm going to go ahead and do each carb one at a time to its completion, starting with number 1, and then move on to 2 and 3 all the way up to carb number 6. That's basically what I'm talking about here. And then going over a couple other things like the fuel tees, showing you why it was leaking, you know, all the junk that's on those O-rings, and that sort of material.
I have all the carb bodies apart. I said I wasn't going to do it that way, but I had to do it that way. So here's what happened. I obviously tore them all down as a group, which I said I was not going to do. And here's why. I pulled number 1 float bowl off and went to take the float pin out. This is number 1's float. And the float pin was completely stuck in the standoffs where the pins go through for the float. And anyway, doesn't matter. We'll just grab a carb here. Doesn't matter if it's number 1 or not. I'm talking about these guys right here. The float pin was completely stuck in there. Now, there's really not much room on that side between that. I think that's part of the emulsion tube that's pressed in there, and the pin itself to get in there and try to push it out. Nothing I did would get that out, and I certainly can't leverage against that because it'll break off. So I had a bright idea that I could use my pencil torch and get a little bit of heat into these standoffs, which did work. I was able to get the pin out, but I damaged the float. So I'm going to eat this one because that was a dumb mistake.
Idiot!
Reason why I know it's a dumb mistake is I didn't think about it when I was doing number 1, but when I saw number 1 float pin stuck, I said I need to stop the direction I'm going in as far as doing 1 carb at a time. Take the float bowls off of all 6 carbs and see if they're stuck. Well, it turns out only 1, 2, and 3 had stuck float pins. 4, 5, and 6 had stuck slow screws, but we'll get to that in a second. So anyway, what I ended up doing was I took the number 2 and number 3 carb, stripped them down, and individually put them into the ultrasonic with the heat turned up on nuclear, and I was able to get the pins out without any damage to the floats in number 2 and 3. So I'll eat this one. I'll go ahead and order one. He won't pay for that. It was a dumb idea. So as far as 4, 5, and 6 go, 5 and 6 go, the slow screws were stuck in 5 and 6. And it's pretty interesting. I saw in number 6 that somebody at some point had tried to cut a screwdriver slot where the slow screw lives, but there wasn't any slot in the screw itself. Apparently they were thinking maybe they could get a screwdriver slot in and adjust that screw because it's got a D-head shaped slow screw. You have to use a special tool for that, which I do have, but it's just not in front of me right now. And that's how I managed to get those out. But if I forced that and stripped out the top of that D-head, I would have had to set this up in the mill and drill that out with a left-handed drill bit. That would have been a real pain in the ass. So I used a little patience and a little bit of thinking and I put it in the ultrasonic on nuclear and was able to get those out. The threads look a little bit corroded, but I think they'll be fine. I'll grease up the slow screws before they go back in. But unfortunately, this is the stuff that happens. I mean, I did not expect that to be the case as far as the float pins go. I haven't really seen that in a long time. The last Valk I did, the butterflies on 3 carbs were stuck. or almost stuck. In other words, they'd move, like really slow, and I had to pull the butterflies out. And I'd rather do stuck float pins all day long than deal with these. This is a real prick to get those out and unwind and then rewind the spring. So that is not the case. But all the bodies are clean. I still got to do the float bowls. But what's going to happen now is I'm going to shut the camera off, and it's probably going to be better part of a week. And then we'll fire it back up when I get a new float in. I'm also going to order the fork seals, OEM, while I'm online doing that in about 10 minutes, I guess. And then, meanwhile, we'll just cover this stuff up and leave it right here. And I got the other parts bagged over there, so instead of in a container, I just use bags for all the individual carb parts. The diaphragms and the needles and so forth, the slide vacuum diaphragm, they all look great, which I would expect. They're really very high quality in these Valkyries, GL 1500s. And so with everything set aside where it's supposed to be, we're not going to have any problem putting it back together. And of course, I got my metal tags on each one of these carbs so I know which number they are. So that's what we'll do. We'll pick it up sometime next week.
5 minutes later.
Well, hold the phone on that last comment about waiting until next week, because it occurred to me there's no reason why we can't rack these up. We'll just put that float in later. And that's, completely accessible when you flip these things upside down when they're racked up to open the float bowls up. So since some bonehead damaged number 1, I do have a shipping notice on that already, by the way. We'll just put the rest of them together, get them all racked, and then when that comes in, flip it upside down, and that way I can pressure test the rack at that time, make sure that everything is tight and sealed up, and we'll be good to go. So I have one more carb to do, which is number 6 in this case, and I'll show you how I do that. We're going to go ahead and work on testing these air cut valves. I think I called them air check valves. That's incorrect. My apologies. I got this from my wife. This is her toothbrush. I'm going to put it back when I'm done. First test we're going to do is this on this air cut valve is the vacuum diaphragm leak test. We're essentially testing two things: the diaphragm integrity itself, number 1, and number 2, that it closes the pathway between these two guys here, okay? And so we're going to test the integrity of the pathway itself here in the second test. So what we need to do first is make sure that our diaphragm is good. So we're going to pump it up to about 15 inches of mercury and make sure that make sure this is on good. Make sure it holds, got a whole vacuum, which it seems to be doing. So we're passing air right then. So now I'm going to put a vacuum on the diaphragms, go up to about 15, 16, still a little bit. And she shuts off around 18. That's where I've typically seen them shut off before. All right, I got it on, but it wants to come off. So let's just test to make sure it holds vacuum. And it does. So these two tests are passed. You complete your air cut valve installation after the screw's in by just putting on a new hose that goes from the vacuum nipple up here. You said nipple, down to the air cut valve itself. The next test we're going to perform is a float bowl gasket integrity test to make sure that these are actually going to seal off when they're installed. That's where this clear plastic plate comes in. It's very, not scratched or nothing, so if it is, you can't use it. Honda puts these on, the gaskets that is. They generally use that red gooey shit. It's like almost like a Honda Bond, but it's red in color. And essentially what happens with that is when you take the float bowl gaskets off, it leaves that residue, and most of the time, brake clean will affect it to a degree to clean it off, but most of the time you end up having to do some scraping. He recommends using a plastic pick, which is somewhere in this kit somewhere. He provides that, but I sometimes just use a end of a tube from a spray can like this. That works pretty well. But if you really have something stuck and you got to get a little bit more aggressive, you just have to do it with extreme care. And what this does is test to make sure that there's no scratches that are going to cause these to leak once they're installed. We'll go ahead and put the drain screw in all the way. Make sure that it's covering the entire float bowl gasket surface. And we're going to flip it over and hold it. And we're going to stick on our vacuum pump here, if we can get it on, like that. Then we're going to go ahead and just crack the drain screw. Make sure that we're seated good. We're holding good pressure here on the flow bowl itself, on that glass. And we're just going to pull a vacuum on it. Make sure it holds. And now this float bowl is ready for installation. Okay folks, it's time to rack these up. I'm going to do this in a very abbreviated format, and it's going to be a time-lapse format when I get into that. I want to cover basically 3 things though. The first one is specific to these Valkyrie carbs. The other 2 are more generic in regards to any multi-carb rack that you're working on where you tear it down to bits like this. First thing is regarding the Valk carbs. This arm, I replaced the bearings in it off camera, and maybe I have a clip or 2 of that. And then I made sure that I did that to his instructions, those little tiny bearings. And then to put this arm on, it's a little easier to do it on the number 3 carb where it goes between number 3 and number 4. And with the carb separated, in other words not connected to any rack, then you flip it over. I jammed a pen up into the butterfly to keep it open, and then that swings that lever up to where you can actually get at it. This lever here swings it around like that. All right, so then you follow the instructions if you have the red eye kit as to how to put your pieces back in. If you're reusing the pieces, go ahead and freeze frame this and then keep it like in a photo or something. That way you know if you're going to reuse them and you didn't take any pictures of them coming apart, the order in which they go back together. The other 2 things again are more generic but very, very important. First of all, when you clean these carbs, see that little opening down there where the fuel T or the fuel joints go, depending on what's carburetor you're working on. That's right down in there. Now those holes, what I did was I cleaned them out really thoroughly. Let's see if I can get a better shot of one on another carb. That's what I'm talking about. You need those really, really clean. You can't leave any crap in them. They're going to be a little corroded if it's been sitting for a while like that one. You can see a kind of a tiny bit of corrosion in that one right there. But it's really the best you can do. And how I do this is I take just a piece of aluminum 1/4 inch or whatever this is. I just cut a slot in the end with a hacksaw, and I put a piece of Scotch-Brite in it and a drill and WD-40, and I clean the snot out of those things. And then make sure you have your carbs totally clean from that operation. It's best to do that before you do all the deep cleaning, okay? And so you got to have that really clean. The other part of that, I guess that'd be the third part, is any of your fuel T's or your fuel joints, especially the plastic. Well, it doesn't matter if it's plastic or aluminum. You don't want to get the old O-rings out using any type of a metal tool if at all possible. Now the kit comes with a little plastic pick, and what you can do with that plastic pick is put a little oil on these so the pick kind of goes past the O-ring easier, and work it underneath the O-ring, and then just peel the O-rings off. Use the same plastic pick when you clean the gaskets off of the float bowls. This goes for the aluminum joints or the fuel T's themselves, whether they're aluminum or plastic, because if you scratch the inner part of that or damage it, you're going to have a potential fuel leak, and this is all for naught. So I definitely wanted to mention those 2 things, 3 things really, before I started. And now we're going to go into a time lapse and get these things put back together. Time lapse, is that kind of like a time warp? All right, folks, we're back to where we started. They're all back together. I got the springs between the carbs, which are rather fiddly, and I've got the springs on the paddles, if you will, for between each of the adjusters, you know, for the synchronizers. I reused some of the springs. They were fine. I had to replace one because one spring was bad. Got the chrome covers all nice. I soaked these about a day and a half in Evapor-Rust. They were pretty rusty, especially on the inside. Wish I could have done more with the brackets, but you know, we're not restoring here, we're repairing, so we can only do so much. And other than that, I've got the choke assembly put in. That is a little bit fiddly as well, because you got a spring behind one of these guys, be up in here, and you have to attach it into that little tang so it recoils properly. It gets pulled from the bike lever from this side, so essentially it's pulling this way. All right, doing this, and then transferring over via that cable to this side. So I lubed the cable really good with some light oil and got this adjusted in so they're even. You want to make it so there's just a little bit of play, so there's no chance that the cable from one side to the other, for example, is keeping any of the choke plungers even partially open. Speaking of adjust, the last thing I did was do a bench synchronization. I flip it over and I use a little piece of feeler gauge that's provided in the kit. The base carb is number 3 over here. It happens to be the same carb as what has the throttles cables hooked to it, so this carb is non-adjustable. So I started on this side and got a feel for that feeler gauge on the closed side of the bore, and then adjusted all 5 others to match that feel. It'll get you close enough so when you put it on the vacuum synchronizer, you know, at least the engine's going to run pretty good. So yeah, that's where we're at. So the next step is we're going to put it back in the bike. I'm going to try to squeeze that in on this video. I'm not sure yet. I'm not going to film any of the installation. So the next time that you see it, it'll be on. You know, we got our fuel line back on, so it'll be ready for fuel, and then we'll fire it up and see how she runs with the freshly rebuilt carbs. Okay, folks. I'm not going to be able to squeeze in getting them on the bike and running them in this video. I'm at about 30 minutes right now, and that's quite long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here, and then the next video that comes out on this bike is going to be after I install all the carbs off camera. We'll do a first start, and that way I can include the synchronization, because if I tried to put a running video and a sync video at the end of this one, it'd be way too long. I'd have over an hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it that way. So again, sorry I couldn't squeeze it all in. I whittled this one down as far as I could so I wouldn't lose the important information that I really wanted to share with y'all. The best I could do. So again, we're going to go ahead and stop it here, and we'll pick up the rest of it on the next video. If you want to see all that stuff and more, you know what you need to do. You need to stick around. Subscribe, like the video, share, ring the bell. You get notified when I put more stuff up. So again, thanks for watching. Catch you on that next video.